Welcome back.
Welcome back, Ivan and everyone.
Esports now, all right?
Esports,
Okay.
which I think is one of the most important talks of this edition of Gamelab. Just because, as we were talking before, esports is a branch of video games that needs the people to go alive. It's all about the show. It's all about these palaces full of people cheering
It's
up.
a little bit like Gamelab, right? It's like
Gamelab when we do it in
pure
Barcelona.
show, right? When we do it in Barcelona, we get all the people together.
Yeah.
Almost as esports. Big stadiums full with people, amazing show. But unfortunately, this year we cannot have that.
None of that. None of that. So the situation has brought us to think, what's the future of esports?
Yeah, what's the present of esports this year? What's the future? Is this going to change something in what's happening in the next few years of esports?
Yeah.
What are companies thinking about? And for this conversation, to learn more about this, we have three really experienced people in the esports industry to try to help us understand a little bit how this is going to change the world of esports.
So
Mike Sepso, who is one of the pioneers of the sector, is the founder, the creator of the Major League in the US, the Major League Gaming, actually. And he was also a top executive at Activision Blizzard, launching globally the Overwatch League.
So probably the guy that knows the most about esports.
Not probably.
Right now.
Is our advisor at Gamelab for esports, and he's the guy that knows more probably in the world about esports.
So with Mike Sepso, we have Nicolaj
Nyholm, who is an investor. He was an investor in the gaming space for years, and now he's an investor specifically on esports. He's the CEO and the founder of the Astralis Group, who has some of the biggest brands in the esports world, like Astralis, of course, and also Origin, one of the top clubs in the League of Legends competitions. And along with them, we have Sergi Mesonero.
Mesonero, who is going to be
he's going to be trying to do the right questions, but Sergi himself has a lot of experience in the sector as well as one of the pioneers. Here in Spain, he was the founder of the biggest esports league, and now is the head of esports for the Interactive Software Federation of Europe. So knows a lot about esports as well, of course. And the three of them are ready. Sergi from Barcelona.
Hopefully we will get to some interesting conclusions on how to bring the future to this branch of video games.
we want to talk about the present and the future. From here, from Barcelona, as I was saying,
to the world.
From Copenhagen, where Nicolaj is right now, and from New York, from the top of the world, where Mike is waiting for us to connect. So let's say hello to them, right?
Let's say hello. Hello, guys.
Hello, Nicolaj. Hello, Mike, and hello, Sergi.
Thank you, Ivan, and thank you, Gamelab, for always devoting a spot to esports, this next $5 billion industry. We are all waiting for that to be true. The earlier, the better. I'm going to introduce our guests, although I don't think they need much introduction if you are into esports. I'm going to start with Nyholm. Nicolaj is a five-time entrepreneur and former venture capitalist. And now he's the founder and chairman of Astralis Group. Astralis is a huge esports property. They own powerhouses like Astralis, probably the most celebrated Counter-Strike team in the world. Origin, which is one of the most beloved brands in League of Legends European competition, in particular in Spain, and Future FC in FIFA. Astralis became the first esports company that had an initial public offering on Nasdaq Copenhagen last year. During his VC tenure, Nicolaj specialized in video game investments, including investments in Mojang, Minecraft, everybody knows that. And as an entrepreneur, he was founder of Polar Rose and EMT, which exited to Apple and Vodafone. So hello, Nicolaj, I'm very happy to have you here.
Hello, happy to be here remotely.
Yes, unfortunately. And Mike is an old school Gamelab. If I'm not mistaken, he's been at Gamelab at least 2 or 3 times more. And he's very well known as a truly sports pioneer who has been helping shape this industry since 2002 when he co-founded MLG, Major League Gaming, which, by the way, was a big influence in the creation of my own company, LVP, back in 2009, but it's old stories. And MLG has been a huge influence. They had some of the very first milestones, including launching the first professional esports league system, securing the first linear television series with NBC, and building a premium esports content OTT platform. In 2015, Mike joined Activision Blizzard to launch the company's first esports and media division, which evolved in the esports arm of Activision that currently is producing big powerhouses like Overwatch League and Call of Duty League, among other properties. And last year, Mike launched Index, a new sports company, with an initial funding of a staggering $80 million that wants to build a first of its kind esports infrastructure platform with the mission of providing technology services, innovation and experience that will not only help take esports to the next level, but more importantly, solve a key hurdle in esports, which is growth. Thank you, Mike, for having you again at Gamelab.
Nice to be here. I wish I was in Barcelona, but it's nice to be with you guys anyway.
Yeah, actually, I think we have to start with the elephant in the room, which is the reason why we are doing this online instead of live in Barcelona, and then after the panel going to the after party, which is always the best part, which is the global pandemic of COVID-19. It's true that we have mixed messages regarding the impact of COVID-19 in esports, but it has also helped grant esports, in my opinion, their biggest exposure ever. There has been an immense amount of time devoted to esports in these past 3 months, not only from traditional esports properties, but also from traditional sports organizations and competitions that have been organizing their own esports competitions while their traditional live competitions have been stopped, unfortunately. My first question would revolve around the topic of whether you think esports has seized the opportunity that, for good or for bad, the global pandemic has given us. Do you think that esports is leveraging this sudden rise in exposure and popularity? We can start. I mean, you're free. Okay, I'm going to start with Mike.
Sure. Yeah, look, I think obviously it's all very unfortunate, the reason that this is happening, but from the perspective of a wider consumer base who has no live traditional sports to watch, esports has been able to fill at least some level of replacement content effectively. And I think it's exposed esports content to a wider variety of consumers around the world simply because there are no live sports to watch. I think the other part of the attention, part of it is consumer based, and I think we're seeing more people watching esports probably for the first time. But the other side is the business side, where content networks, meaning television networks, as well as different online platforms, need additional content because they don't have live sports to program with. So I think here in the US, ESPN in particular has played a tremendous amount of esports content on its network in replacement for traditional sports. So, I don't think we know any hard data yet about what the impact has created in terms of real viewership or new viewers to esports or first-time viewers, but I suspect that anecdotally, at least, we will see a pretty significant increase in overall engagement and an increase in the overall fan base. I think on the business side, though, you're sort of getting a proof point for a lot of traditional media distribution platforms that would not otherwise be experimenting with esports content. So I think all of it is very good. And then, of course, underlying our industry are the publishers who are really putting most of the capital and resources behind at least the recent growth in esports. And from that perspective, they all seem to be performing incredibly well financially and luckily also reinvesting a lot of that resource, capital and human resource into esports. So I think it's, obviously it would still be better if we could have huge live events and have everybody together in arenas and, celebrate esports like we do normally. But given the downturn and the unavailability of traditional live sports, it is a really interesting time for esports.
Yeah, I think if you, sorry. No,
Please
what I was
ahead.
about to say is that what's sort of interesting is that you definitely have two different groups of tournament organizers, league organizers. Some you look at them and it looks as if they basically stepped 15 years back, and it looks like that photo you shared, Sergi, from your first office, right? Very, very basic, and others have made tremendous strides forward. I think if you look at it from a business perspective, I mean, we can see that the tournaments that our teams have been participating in are up almost 100% year over year. Hopefully, I would wish I could say all of that was organic, but a lot of it is definitely driven by the crisis. But what of course has been lagging, I would say not lacking, is that the advertisers are a little bit late to the game. But this is, as Mike says, it's validation, and what we can see. I'm here in Copenhagen. Society is mostly normalized now, and what we can see now is a tremendous influx of sponsors, of advertisers who realize that this is sustainable, this is real, and this is going to happen no matter what happens next winter or 5 winters going forward. So in that way, it's been a tremendous validation.
Yeah, and do you think that I think it's safe to assume that the audience has grown a lot this past 3 months. Do you guys think that the audience is going to stay, or is it going, to go back to their original consumption levels when the crisis is over?
Well, I mean, some of them are definitely here for a very short time, right? If you look at a lot of viewership, for example, of FIFA through betting operators, sports betting operators, that's people who are just there because, to do something. They're watching FIFA because they can't watch regular football and they want to bet on it, and FIFA is the most the closest approximation. That's not a huge segment, but these people will of course go away. While we can see here in Denmark as esports makes its way, and even new games make their way onto traditional linear broadcasts. Those are people who suddenly are, who are people who've played before themselves some games, entirely new audience who's never played games before, and who we know from previous cycles of the same happening with esports in the Nordics are definitely going to stick around.
Mike, we've heard in the past many times that video gaming, it's a crisis-proof industry. Do you think, well, first, that video gaming is a crisis-proof industry, and then second, that esports is as well? What do you think will happen in the next couple or 3 years? I mean, under possible global economic uncertainty or turmoil, is esports going to suffer? What may suffer? What may thrive?
Yeah, so I think gaming, first, I don't think anything is crisis proof. I think gaming performs better than other media formats for sure. And I think whether a health crisis like the pandemic or the economic crisis that resulted from it, gaming, one, you can do it at home, you can do it online, so that makes it sort of accessible technically under circumstances like this. But in a negative or a depressed economic environment, gaming on a kind of per hour basis is an incredible value proposition. So especially with free to play models and things like that, you have hours and hours and hours of, really on a per hour basis, what you're paying is so small as compared to what you would pay to watch a movie or things like that. So I think from that perspective, just the underlying unit economics of gaming is a very high value proposition. So negative economic times people tend to gravitate towards that better value. I think for esports, I've been incredibly impressed with our broadcast teams at Vindex, who have been able to work really quickly and create very high quality broadcasts remotely. And I don't just mean the players and hosts and things like that are remote. I mean, every one of the broadcast engineers and producers and directors and people making the graphics and everything is, everybody's sitting at home. They're not next to each other in control rooms. So the ability to innovate very quickly and still deliver a high value, high quality broadcast is incredible. You can't, though, at the end of the day, you can't really replicate what 10,000 people in an arena bring in terms of energy of a live event. So there are some aspects to esports that, just like traditional sports, can't really be replaced. We're humans and we love to experience things together, and there's just a different energy and feel in that. So I think, short term, yeah, because we can still continue to produce esports content remotely, and traditional sports obviously can't. There is no substitute for the live event. There's an advantage there, but long term, all of us, sports and esports, need to get back to the real world and enjoy things together as a community. So hopefully, the world will be able to tackle the health crisis. We'll deal with the economic crisis after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to possibly one of the most discussed topics all the time that somebody approaches esports, which is money. Which actually, I mean, we could devote a whole conference just talking about esports and money, but the existence or lack of existence in it. But it's true that in the past, in these past years, we've seen a lot of money invested in esports. Do you think this is going to change? And in particular, we saw a first wave some years ago of investment around mostly tournament organizers. Then it came like a second wave centered around team properties that may or may not have slots in big franchise leagues. Is the typology of recipients changing? Is going to change because of the crisis? What are your opinions around the topic of esports investments for the next couple or 3 years? We can start with Nicolaj, maybe.
You just raised 80 million.
Yeah, I'll go then. No, I think obviously we just raised a lot of money to launch Vindex. Luckily, not out of smartness, out of luck, we did it before all of the global pandemic issues hit. So purely from a timing point of view, we were very lucky. But the reality is, I think anytime you have a crisis like this, it doesn't matter if it's esports or any other kind of early stage immature industry, from an investment point of view, generally speaking, investors want to move a little bit more towards sort of quality or stability of business. I think at early stage, they want to be sort of less risky. And so investment theses tend to turn away from the more speculative, big picture kind of, hope and a prayer kind of investment, and it moves more towards stable financial models and more places where you can see there's real innovation and a path toward profitability. And so I think all investors tend to get more conservative. I think we will see less speculative things. One thing I don't think we'll see though is any sort of reversal in the amount of investment capital that's interested in esports generally. I think one of the largest problems that we have as an ecosystem is just, and this is the case for investors, it's also the case for advertisers and other aspects of the industry. We still have an educational issue. Lots of kind of early stage tech investors think of esports as a hot market because of the size of the consumer base and how big the audience is and how global it is. But they don't really understand how it all works. And that, I think, in the early stages of that inflate of capital into the esports ecosystem led to a lot of uneducated bets on things. But part of that is that's an investor's process, is to make some early bets as a way to kind of learn about an industry. So I think, we're probably 3, maybe 4 years into the really significant increase in capital investment coming into esports. It usually takes, 5 to 10 years for investors to get really good at a sector. So hopefully we're getting more educated bets, but at the same time, I think you're going to see businesses that were a bit more speculative, that maybe didn't have a solid sort of unit economic foundation behind the business, have a tough time continuing to get capital to fund their growth, or really just to keep them around. While you'll see other businesses where they may not be profitable, but there's a clear path to profitability based on the unit economics of the business model. I think you'll continue to see more investment in those kind of things. So it's a little bit more like a flight to quality. In our case, in Vindex's case, is what people refer to as a picks and shovels business, meaning we're not making games, we're not creating leagues, we're not a tournament operator, we're providing services and technologies and experiences to rights holders in most cases. So it's usually the publishers who are operating leagues, or the platforms that want to create and distribute content, or in many cases the teams also who are more and more becoming significant content creators in the space. So I think all of that kind of model will continue to be able to raise capital. Things that are more dependent on access to publishers' data or IP, things where you haven't really proven out the unit economics of how the business works, those will all be significantly more difficult to fund. And I think, unfortunately, because of the life cycle we were in early stage esports businesses, many of those companies that in better economic environments would have continued to get funding are going to have a lot of difficulty doing that in the environment that we're in today.
I think there's going to be quite a lot of more concentration of capital, and I think specifically if you look at the teams business, there's going to be, there is already right now a lot of teams that are starting to go under because they have never figured out what they were really going to do. They haven't been able to create the dominance or participate in the franchise leagues. And create the individual identity where, people who are simply trying to replicate something that they see somewhere else with a little bit of money are not going to be around in half a year or even in just a couple of months.
Do you think, both of you, because you have very different backgrounds, that there's still a space for building new properties around traditional esports models, tournaments, or teams, or it's the time to invest in other segments, services, new business models?
I would certainly not put another dollar into a new team or into a new company, setting up operations or setting up a league. But I would certainly, if I look at if I have $100 available to invest, an increasing amount of that portion would certainly go to esports and definitely gaming overall. If we just look over the last 5 years and even more so in the coming 5 years.
Okay, so sorry, Mike, were you going to add something? Okay, no. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Well, we were talking before about the amount of money that has gone into various speculative projects, but the fact is that company valuations are fraught by a lack of knowledge and lack of data. Okay, is there any way to know how much money an esports company is worth? And basically this.
You want to take that, Nicolaj?
Well, I mean, I was a VC at one point. You know, how do you measure the value of any early technology company? And I think that's difficult. But you know, of course, as you know, as Mike puts it, there are companies now that are getting into very solid, predictable business models with predictable cash flow. You know, we even see different type of financing companies coming in and you know, financing, for example, franchise league fees in return for security of the league revenue shares, of the media revenue coming in from those leagues. The same way that that there are companies financing Premier League player transfers with security in the Premier League earnings by that club. You know, so we're starting to have an ability to, you know, to value cash flow, to value long-term contracts, and that's of course much easier. But the early stage where it's all speculative, that will always be difficult, whether we're talking about, you know, a gaming company, an esports company, or a technology company at large.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, you know, sometimes in esports, because we are so insulated from the rest of the world, we forget that, of course, there's a way to value companies. Every company has a valuation on every stock market. It's usually based on some earnings multiple or some projection of growth, but it's all financially driven. And in esports, we've been mostly kind of idea driven, and investments, you know, in sort of the past few years, valuations have gone up a lot purely out of supply and demand. So you have to remember that, you know, equity stakes in early stage speculative businesses in high growth sectors like esports, there's a lot of demand to invest in that equity from professional investors. And so that inevitably, with limited availability of places to put capital, it's just a supply and demand mechanism is going to create increased valuations. Same thing when something like this happens and there's an artificial hit to the global economy and that capital starts to become more conservative, there's less demand. And so prices are going to fall pretty quickly. And I think that's sort of the issue that a lot of very speculative early stage esports companies that raised capital in the prior environment, where there was, you know, oversupply of over demand of capital and undersupply of equity in those positions, that's going to go away. And so if they've raised money at too high valuation, they're probably going to have trouble getting back to that or over that in the future round, if they can't really prove out the maturity of the model and some predictability to it. So I think this is, you know, one of those situations, and it's not isolated to esports. Every early stage sector is experiencing this right now, that you know, there's this sort of flight to quality. There's less risk taking in an environment that's less predictable from a macroeconomic point of view. So it's going to impact us. I think, though, the sector itself in esports is still a very high growth place to participate. And so I don't think all capital will dry up. I just think some of the frothiness in valuation and some of the kind of over demand of capital looking at too short of supply of available investment opportunities, that's going to dry up a little bit.
Nicolaj, properties and companies in Europe seem less successful attracting money than North American ones. Is Europe lagging?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, if I look at my entire career, which has been either I've been on the receiving end of venture capital or I've been on the giving end of venture capital, it's always been the same story, right? You know, the American companies have done a much better job in attracting capital. I think, you know, specifically if we start looking at the teams business, of course, the fact that you in the U.S. have a higher tradition for franchise leagues, for for specific investments into an NBA, NHL, NFL franchise property, that means that there was a resonance with a type of investors that we don't find here in Europe, specifically family offices. So I think that's that's definitely been a part of it. The other part has been just the general market, and then the last part has of course been that we also sit in a situation where if we're addressing, Astralis has started out of Denmark, we're certainly addressing a global community of fans and consumers, but not until we actually proved that we were able to do that. We were simply measured on being a Danish or a Nordic company, and not one which could address a much larger market. So I think that's the so if you're starting up a French esports team, you're going to be measured on the French market until you prove that you can actually go global. So I think rightfully, for many different reasons, it's the European teams have not attracted as much capital. I don't think it's necessarily bad these times. We're still able to beat the Americans in most instances, so we're all happy about that.
Okay, anything you want to add? Anything, Mike?
Well, U.S. sports usually lag behind. We don't come out of the gate strong, but we wind up winning eventually, I think, right? No, I think look, just generally speaking, like Nicolaj said at the beginning, the venture market is much more active and liquid, and there's kind of a lot more supply in the U.S. Obviously, it's also early stage investing in the U.S. is a very different regulatory environment than it is in the EU, and so therefore it's kind of a more it's a freer ecosystem that sort of supports lots of high risk investment at early stages. And the organization of how that capital kind of comes together and gets distributed through a variety of ecosystems of funds. It's sort of significantly larger and a lot more liquid in the US, but that's for kind of every early stage tech. I think if you talk to enterprise software companies in Europe, they'd have the same sort of point of view, that it's much easier. And even within the US, you sort of hear companies and startups in early stage tech in the Midwest and the South have a much harder time raising capital than you would if you were the same company in San Francisco. So there's definitely regional differences, and it's largely just based on kind of where the capital is, how it's being managed, and what's the regulatory environment behind it.
In a recent article, media executive Matthew Ball, I don't know if you've read it, asserted that the fact that publishers mostly see esports as a marketing line was hurting the creation of value and the creation of a sustainable ecosystem. On the other hand, of course, there wouldn't be any esports without the games that the publishers made. Mike, you've been everywhere. I mean, you created your own tournament organizer, then you end up in a publisher. What's your take on this topic?
Yeah, look, I think the early stage world, sort of pre-2015, I guess, 2016, most of esports was being funded through marketing groups, right? Marketing organizations inside of publishers. And, that period from 2002, I guess, to 2015, where MLG and ESL both were very successful by kind of tapping in to those dollars. Nobody was investing in esports at the time, so the investment capital was really marketing budgets from publishers. And so we all tried a lot of different business models to try to make that work. But look, the entire strategic thesis behind Activision's acquisition of MLG was to change esports inside of Activision and Blizzard from a marketing sort of marketing resource or marketing focus into creating a new business. And so, when I went into Activision Blizzard, it was created a whole new division that sat next to Activision Publishing and Blizzard. that was, started out with just me as the only employee. And then we added obviously the whole MLG team and a variety of other people to that mix. But the objective was create a real league and media business around the esports activity. So I think in that one deal, you sort of saw the whole industry start to switch over, because the biggest publisher, certainly at the time, and I think now still, the biggest independent publisher of games, and Blizzard, which is sort of one of the most important studios in the history of esports, were all switching over. They just made that internal decision, and it wasn't an easy one. It was, I can tell you lots of war stories from inside, but it was a definite switch over in thinking and strategic thinking. And I think that event, and then the eventual rollout of the Overwatch League as the first kind of fixed franchise city-based model, it changed a lot of things, a lot of the dynamics of the industry. And I think all the other publishers wanted to wait and see how that performed. And I can tell you it performed commercially, it performed incredibly well, because it was stable. It created a strong investment thesis. Like Nicolaj was saying earlier, now you see different types of financing options for teams that are effectively securitizing future revenue streams from the leagues, from league revenue shares. That's not something that existed in the prior structure. So it created a whole new kind of platform or a whole new structure, and it created a real a change in the way sort of advertisers and media distributors and investors were able to think about the industry, because the most important thing was just permanence and structure, and then the rights issue was cleared up. Like, the hardest part, I know, for the guys at ESL and for us at MLG, was we never had any long-term capability to work with a single game. Even if you saw us running the same game, in a league organization or a tournament circuit year after year after year, we were still going back and getting those rights on a yearly basis. So you couldn't create any long-term permanence. Really difficult to do it in that environment. So the switchover was, the Activision acquisition of MLG created that opportunity. And I think that was the change that set the industry to thinking, hey, we can create a league business. So it's another whole business for publishers to create and control. And I think, look, I didn't have a ton of fans because of that initially. That was like a big Band-Aid to rip off the industry and just sort of change things. And I think, but that model seems to have perpetuated and sort of changed the way that people think about the industry that are outside the industry. I know it's not always the best inside when change happens, but I do think that that's created really interesting opportunities. And it, largely all of the publishers, especially Riot, right after Activision Blizzard moving to that kind of fixed franchise model, just that was what started to create the influx of investment capital, but also ad revenue and other things that really drove the idea that this could be a business. So it's certainly not there across the board. I would agree with Matthew that still a lot of publishers and studios think of esports as a marketing investment to engage with their fan base and drive engagement. But it is more and more a real business model. And I think in many cases, especially with sort of free-to-play multiplayer games that are more, in a way almost like a platform versus a particular game, that model is getting merged together too. So it's becoming one and the same. And I think that that's happening quickly. And so I think if you base your assumptions on what you're doing in the esports industry on the idea that it's always going to be viewed as marketing, I think you're going to be behind the curve.
I totally agree, and I also think that what's quite interesting is that we've seen these dispersed models, right? Valve on the one hand, which has had a very distributed laissez-faire model, which is now starting to hurt them a little bit, because their ability to contribute back and actually make it into, for example, into a media business and sustain the ecosystem is limited compared to an Activision Blizzard with Overwatch League, Call of Duty League, and so forth, where they, on the other hand, might have killed off a little bit of the community initiative. So I think what's going to be interesting now is, well, what about the games that are being designed today, or what about the games that just came out? We've seen the most most successful PC game launch in history with Valorant, largely capitalizing on maybe not esports, but certainly the entertainment, gaming as media off streams on Twitch. And how's Riot going to do that? How's Riot going to handle the distribution of the creation of wealth, the distribution of monetization, and so forth? I think we're going to see things in a very different manner. Also, because the games are being designed from the bottom up with this in mind, instead of esports being something which was latched onto it with the limitations of that. So I agree. To me, it's actually very much a backwards looking view, and certainly raises some of the issues which are present in the ecosystem, but that are changing with incredible pace, as Mike is also saying.
I think we have time for one more question, which is a pity because I'm finding the conversations fascinating. But let's go to revenue. The other big topic around money that it's always mentioned. Most widely available revenue models, okay, I'm not going to say names, we all have them in the mind, but we'll put global revenue in esports around $1 billion, okay? This figure is right below the yearly budget of Football Club Barcelona, okay? The fact is that revenue per fan currently is very low. Does esports have a monetization problem, or we are not there yet? It's not time yet to think about profitability in esports, and we must think about other things like growing, finding other niches of activity. What are your takes on it?
I think, first of all, comparison with FC Barcelona is for me a little bit off. Given just the history of that sport, given the history of that club, and I would say that a lot of football didn't really take off until the Premier League deals of 91, 92 in the UK, where that was where the economies really started. Of these clubs really started to take off. We're an incredibly young sport entertainment, competitive entertainment format, and I think, but I do think it's also correct to say that we should not be expecting and anticipating simply to be replicating the business model of the sports clubs, right? We're not going to reach the same media rights revenues that one was able to take back in the days of paywalls on TV. But some of the extremely interesting stuff is our ability to interact directly with our fans. So what do our direct to fan subscription products look like? What is the ultimate blending back into the games, which we'll also see at some point, look like? And I think that's our responsibility to take on and take on as we're building this industry.
Yeah, the fact is that here in Spain itself, I mean, it was very recently that football clubs actually acquired these big budgets. Meanwhile, a decade ago, media rights were very low, or a couple of decades ago. So yes, I mean, everything needs an evolution. But Mike, we are running out of time. What's your take on this topic?
Yeah, look, media rights account for somewhere between 60 and 70% of the revenue, like pie, or the overall revenue picture for traditional sports. And that's the least developed, least mature part of the monetization picture for esports. One, because esports is a native digital product, and therefore we're distributing it on the internet. And just generally speaking, the media rights market for internet content is not anywhere near as mature as the linear television model. So it's just a different sort of environment. Plus, it's a whole new content type. So we're still convincing people that everything that we do is not strange and crazy, and that, in fact, hundreds of millions of fans around the world love it. And so I think that we're fighting sort of perception, but also it takes time for these markets to mature. I think the other thing is, a big part of what I think franchise leagues and publisher-controlled leagues can do is really push the market to accept the fact that this content is worth quite a bit. And so I think the content itself is grossly undervalued. If you were to look at the audience demographics and size and engagement of big esports broadcast and compare it to the same sort of audience metrics for a televised version of a traditional sports broadcast, the audiences are getting to be of equivalent size. They tend to be younger and somewhat more active and more difficult to reach through traditional television. So from that perspective, on a one-for-one basis, if you just did the math, the value of esports content is grossly sort of under-monetized at this point, but it's incumbent on the rights owners to do the deals like the early 90s EPL deals. And in fact, the NFL here in the US is about to go into another cycle of negotiating new media rights deals. It's going to be billions and billions of dollars. It's massive amounts of capital because the NFL has done a great job of perfecting the television product and creating a real market, and they demand incredibly high prices for that media distribution. And they're continuing to get that not just here in the US, but globally, where the sport is significantly less viewed. They're getting still lots and lots of money, billions of dollars from international distribution of a largely US sports product. So I think if you look at the traditional model for guidance on how to create that type of market and how to demand higher and higher prices, that's something that I think the esports industry can take to heart. But the environment we live in, with it being digital distribution and things like that, just creates a significantly less mature market with fewer buyers. So it'll take some time, but I do believe it'll get there because the value of the audience is undoubtable.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, which is a big pity. I would like to thank you both for coping with me, and of course to the audience for tuning in. And hopefully we may see each other next year in Barcelona.
That's what. Thank you, the three of you. Thank you, Mike, Nicolaj, and Sergi. It's been very interesting, and we had like a few questions that we wanted to ask you, but we can ask you, as Sergi said, next year eventually in Barcelona. Enjoy the rest of the day, and once again, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Take care.
Take care, guys.